At the end of the day, the main reason why Arabs hate Jews is their distortion of the words of the prophets, from Moses and Solomon on down. The Gath Saadi channel welcomes you, and we start the story and say, the Abrahamic religions are like the Garden of Eden's endless blossoms. The most well-known flowers of this garden, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are three roses that have cross-fertilized each other with their fragrance and colors ever since they began to coexist in Arabia in the 600s. Despite the separation of their legendary ancestors, Isaac and Ishmael, Judaism and Islam have coexisted since the time of Muhammad. During the height of medieval Muslim power, Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews were present in Islamicate courts and contributed to many of the scientific and cultural achievements of the Islamic Golden Age. It was also during this era that some of Judaism's most interesting developments occurred. So, what did Jewish communities look like in the Islamicate world? What was their relationship with their Islamic rulers? And how did Judaism's finest poets and philosophers engage with the cosmopolitan Islamicate cultural milieus? Welcome to our video on Jewish life in the early Islamicate world, from Yathrib to Al-Andalus. This video was sponsored by our kind YouTube members and patrons. Becoming a YouTube member, Jews in Pre-Islamic Arabia. The Midwife of Islam. Jews in Pre-Islamic and Muhammad's Arabia. Judaism and Islam's relationship begins in the Arabian Peninsula, where Jews had been living for centuries before the rise of Islam. When the Prophet Muhammad was born, there were already ancient established Jewish communities in Arabia, including one in Medina. These communities coexisted with other religious groups, such as pagans, Christians, Zoroastrians, Gnostics, and Hanafs of various stripes. In southern Arabia, Jewish influence had a prominent influence on the culture of the Himyarite kingdom, which may have been a Jewish kingdom during part of its existence. It is also possible that sects of Jewish Christians, like the Ebionites, probably lived in Arabia after going extinct in the Near East, and likely had some influence on early Islam. When Muhammad arrived in Medina after his expulsion from Mecca, he appears to become a mediator of local disputes. The Constitution of Medina, a document that may date to this period, recognizes the Jews as a group with freedom of religion. The Constitution seems to recognize the Jews as a community in their own right with their own obligations. Sources mention that the Sabbath and Yom Kippur were observed by the Muslim community in Medina. It is thus possible that Judaism had some influence on early Islam directly. Although this natal version of Islam still differed from Judaism in a few ways, such as what it considered kosher or halal. The Quran recognizes the Jews as Ahl al-Kitab, people of the book, alongside the Christians and the elusive Sabians. The battles that Muhammad fought against the Jewish tribes of Arabia, like the Banu Qurayza or the Khaybar, are more geopolitical than anti-Semitic. Theologically, the Quran sees the Psalms and Torah of the Hebrew Bible as revealed scripture of Islam that was later corrupted, which is also how it interprets the Gospels of the New Testament. Various Quranic surahs mention Judaism. Throughout the Middle Ages, Islamic polities were generally more tolerant of Jewish communities than their medieval Christian counterparts were, but were not immune from episodes of persecution, like in the Almohad kingdom, which attempted to convert them to Islam alongside Christians. By the end of Muhammad's life, the Jewish tribes that had moved to Arabia or had converted to Judaism all lived under the Islamic Caliphate and in the early Muslim expansions. They fought alongside their Muslim cousins to conquer the Middle East, from Khorasan's endless steppes to Al-Andalus's rocky hills. The early Islamic caliphates, such as the Rashiduns and Umayyads, placed little focus on conversion, and thus major Christian and Jewish hubs like Babylon and Antioch remained relatively active in the intellectual life of their faiths, though some rural communities later began to convert to Islam. In fact, various Islamic rulers used Christian, Mandean, Zoroastrian, and Jewish sages and philosophers in the translation movement during this period, and elevated them to prominent positions within the intellectual milieu of places like Baghdad, Cairo, and Taifa. Jews, as well as other peoples of the book like Christians, were dhimmis, or second-class citizens. This meant they had certain guarantees towards freedom of religion, but also were saddled with financial obligations not expected of Muslims. Jewish communal organization. The synagogues. Jewish communal organization. There were two major forms of Judaism that predominated in the early Islamicate world: Rabbinical Judaism and its offshoot, Karaite Judaism. Karaite Judaism was founded during this period in Iraq, when two brothers contested for the role of the local communal leader of the Jewish community of Iraq, or Exilarch, around 760 CE. The losing brother, Anan ben David, began a schism, with one story claiming that he did this in prison after discussing with the Islamic scholar Abu Hanifa, who convinced him that oral law was not important in legal interpretation. Karaite Judaism's major theological selling point is that in terms of Jewish law or halakha, only the Torah is thought to play a role, whereas Rabbinical Judaism also uses oral law or the Talmud. Karaites are minimal in number today, but they used to be very numerous in Iraq and Egypt. Karaite rabbinical relations were paradoxical, with both sects expressing open hostility towards each other and their beliefs on one hand, while intermarriage between the two groups being common on the other. Both Karaite and rabbinical Jews ended up working in Islamic courts in various functions. Rabbinical Judaism during the Islamicate Golden Age was adopting a new unique form of organizing itself, the so-called Age of the Geonim. The Geonim were like medieval Judaism's equivalent of the vice-chancellors of Oxford and Cambridge, for they presided over large Jewish academies in Babylon, which studied the Torah, and also presided over the running the Jewish calendar, influencing Jewish communities worldwide. In addition, there were also different forms of the Talmud during this period. The Babylonian Talmud, the revision of the Talmud that is universally used by Jews today, had been redacted in the 500 CE and was being commented on by various rabbinical scholars. However, the Babylonian Talmud had a competitor, the Jerusalem Talmud. This version was likely developed in hubs of Jewish thought in Palestine like Tiberias, as evidenced by the use of Aramaic utilized in the text. Both Talmuds had some popularity in the late antique and early medieval period, but the Jerusalem Talmud faded in popularity by the Islamicate period in the 700 CE and fell out of use as Babylon gained prominence. By the end of the 10th century, the Rishonic period of Jewish history began as the Gaonim in Babylon gave way to locally influential rabbis. This was defined by leading regional rabbis like Moshe de Leon, who wrote the Zohar, Kabbalah's most important text, and Avraham Abulafia, who founded ecstatic Kabbalah, a form of the Kabbalah focusing on asceticism and prophetic experiences. During the Rishonic period, there were prominent Jewish communities in Al-Andalus, the Maghreb, Yemen, Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Central Asia. There they intermingled with local populations and developed their own distinct cultural traditions. Now local community leaders had even more local clout and ability to forge local traditions based on communal needs. Jewish communities during this era could be both rural and urban. The Jews of Morocco and Palestine had a presence in villages, while the Jews of Egypt and Andalusia were more urbanized. Some Jews even rose to positions of high political power, such as Samuel ha-Nagid of Granada, a rare example of a Jew becoming the prime minister of an Islamicate state. These regional divides broadly resulted in the divergence of the Jewish people into two distinct cultural categories: the Mizrahim, or Jews from the Middle East, and Sephardim, or Jews of Al-Andalus. These categories still exist to this day, alongside the Ashkenazi, or Jews Central or Eastern Europe. Jewish cultural development. The Gardens. Jewish cultural development. The Islamicate Golden Age, well known for its great advances in art, science, and literature, was also an era of great cultural advancement for the Jewish people. Both as members of broader Islamicate societies, as well as inside their own communities, Jewish peoples experienced magnificent cultural development through their access to the Islamicate cosmopolitan milieus of Mecca, Athens, Persepolis, Jerusalem, and Alexandria. The most famous Jewish thinker of the time is Moses Maimonides, or Moshe ben Maimon. Born in Cordoba in 1135 or 1138 CE, as a scion of a line of Talmudic judges, or Dayans, he was educated in various Hellenistic philosophies via Arabic translations as well as Jewish halakha and medicine. Maimonides lived in Morocco as a physician before moving to Cairo due to the increasingly anti-Semitic policies of the ruling Almohad dynasty back in Iberia. In Egypt, Maimonides rose to become the physician of a certain Salah al-Din, sultan of the Ayyubid dynasty. he also became the Nagid of the Cairo Jewish community. Maimonides combined Aristotelian and Neoplatonist ideas that span both theology and ethics. Islamicate influences also appear in his philosophy. His Mishnah Torah, a codification of Jewish law, was immensely controversial and popular, shaping Jewish law in matters such as marriage, property, and other secular matters. Maimonides' work as both physician and Jewish sage are much celebrated, and his seminal work of theology, The Guide for the Perplexed, was both popular and controversial for its merging of Hellenic and Jewish thought through an Islamicate lens. His son, Avraham Maimonides, also became a renowned thinker and physician in his own right. The workplace. Jews in Islamicate economy, the Islamicate world, despite experiencing much political turmoil over the centuries, maintained vibrant trade connections and economic development even after the fragmentation of the Umayyad Caliphate. Jews, like their Christian and Samaritan siblings, contributed to this prosperity in various professions. The Maimonides were not the only family of Jewish doctors that thrived in the Islamic world, as many Jews ended up serving in various medical professions throughout this period, especially between the 10th to 12th centuries CE. Jewish physicians were usually educated by their families, which were often multi-generational medical dynasties. Another way for them to enter the medical field was by attending public lectures and study centers in major cities such as Cairo. Usually, military and bureaucratic jobs were not open to non-Muslims, but some Jews managed to work in royal courts regardless. One such man, Shmuel ibn Nagrilla, or Samuel ha-Nagid, worked in the Umayyad government in Cordoba in the late 900 CE. Ha-Nagid was a scribe to the king Habus al-Muzaffar, and even became prime minister of the Taifa of Granada, and even allegedly commanded armies in battle. With his money, he funded the cultural development of various Jewish communities around the Mediterranean. Ha-Nagid was also a notorious poet who used Iberian and Arabesque Al-Andalusian influences to write Hebrew verse that was religious, political, and even erotic in nature. This is most evident in his beautifully crafted Hebrew poem, Answer Me. Build me up like a tower on the heights of your sanctuary, and set me like a seal upon your heart. Make me drunk with the blood of the foe on the day of war, and satisfy me with his flesh on the night of redemption. Place the cup of salvation upon my right hand, that my tongue may give voice in joy to a song of love. For nearly 1,000 years I have declared my sorrow with many tears and with fasting. Will you not answer me? This pattern also appears in Egypt, where both Karaite and rabbinical sources in the Cairo Geniza, a place to deposit sacred scriptures no longer in use, show remarkable literary creativity. Like Andalusian Jews, Egyptian Jewish communities were politically active, participating in the courts of various Egyptian sultans and caliphs as royal scribes and physicians. Throughout the Islamic world, Jews found success as cosmopolitan traveling merchants, working in the transport and sales of goods throughout Central Asia, Iran, and the Arabic world. Various letters in local Jewish languages, such as Judeo-Persian, speak to the presence of tradesmen and their conduct with their fellow cosmopolitans in various matters. Jewish mercantile activity continued despite some bouts of occasional persecution and remained strong even during periods of long-term turmoil, such as the Abbasid Civil War or the Mongol invasions. Thus, we can see that the Islamicate world was a space where Jewish communities actively participated in various spheres of life. Relationships between the Jews and Muslims. The coffee houses, intercommunal relations. We will now move on to intercommunal relations. During the pre-Islamic era and throughout the Islamic conquests in Arabia, the Jewish tribes of Arabia tended to coexist in relative harmony with their neighbors, and while disputes did emerge, local tribal affiliations were more likely to be the reason for conflict than the religion of said tribes. Did this shift with the advent of Islam? As we have seen, there was a general view of tolerance in the Islamicate Golden Age, but we also know that moments of anti-Semitic hatred occurred. For instance, the Granada massacre of 1066 CE, where Muslim mobs stormed the Granada palace and killed many of the Jews of the city, including the son of the then-deceased Samuel ha-Nagid. Another example of anti-Semitism in the medieval Islamic world is the reign of Caliph al-Hakim of the Fatimids, who placed very severe restrictions on the Jews of Egypt. At times, some Islamic caliphs, such as those of the Almohad dynasty, would try to force the al-Khattab to convert to Islam. In general, however, Jews had a more tolerated and open existence than in Christendom, as they had guaranteed rights in the Islamic world not afforded to their estranged kinsmen in Europe. In the medieval Islamic world, the average relationship between citizens of various faiths was likely built around everyday needs and interactions. This pre-modern form of relative tolerance and coexistence survived until the coming of European capitalism and colonialism in the 20th century. This does not mean that casual prejudice did not exist, but given the integration of Jews in various spheres of life in the Islamicate world, and of the all-too-human practice of living and sharing lives, feasts and sorrows together, we can infer that average urban or village dwellers did not bother with existential theological rivalries that their caliphal rulers may have fallen prey to. We can even see this in anthropological records in early 20th century Palestine, where Jews, Christians, and Muslims celebrated each other's feasts. The Islamicate Golden Age was no different in this regard, and even the accounts of the ever-zealous crusader mention instances of coexistence that were unheard of in Europe. While Jews and Christians were second-class citizens by today's standards, they also managed to trade and prosper alongside Muslims. Conclusion. The Bouquet of Abraham. By the end of the Islamic Golden Age and the shift towards the early modern period, Jews were still present throughout the Islamic world and actively contributing to arts, sciences, and philosophy. The Islamicate world, born of Ishmael's descendants, was not immune to anti-Semitic bouts, but it was also far more tolerant than most of Christendom towards the sons of Isaac. Under Muslim rule, Jewish culture was fundamentally transformed. Jews were always active in the prosperity and growth of the societies they lived in. While Abrahamic traditions tell us little of the relationship between Ishmael and Isaac, we know that their descendants were capable of coexisting. Islamicate cosmopolitanism, whether Persianate, Turkic, Arabesque, or Amazigh, always counted Judaism alongside Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Mandaism in the colorful gardens of Baghdad, Marrakesh, Medina, Cairo, and Isfahan, and it is these gardens that perfume the common history of the Abrahamic faiths. More videos on social and religious history are on the way. To ensure you don't miss it, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Recently, we have started releasing weekly patron and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. Goodbye, my friends.